I'm a 29-year-old woman, and about 3 months ago, I got engaged to my boyfriend of 3 years, Ethan. He's 31, works as a data analyst, and has always been a calm, grounded guy. We've lived together for about a year now, and after everything we've been through, getting engaged felt like the natural next step. We wanted to keep things simple, so we invited a few family members over for dinner, my parents, my cousin Rachel, and my Aunt Lydia. Nothing fancy, just a nice evening to celebrate. From the minute they walked through the door, I could tell something was off. Rachel hugged me with that tight smile she always uses when she's pretending to be supportive. Lydia handed me a bottle of wine, commented that the label looked cheaper than she expected, and walked in without waiting for a response. I chalked it up to nerves or bad moods. But it didn't stop there. Over dinner, Ethan talked about how he proposed during a weekend hike and how we'd started looking at venues. Lydia cut in with a sharp already and raised her eyebrows like she was surprised we weren't just dating casually. Rachel jumped in too, asking if we'd at least waited a respectable amount of time before moving in together. My parents just sat there. No one defended us. No one told them to back off. When I stepped into the kitchen to grab dessert, I overheard Lydia whisper to Rachel, "She's always been naive about men, just like her mother." They both laughed, and that laugh felt like something I hadn't heard in a while. Familiar, but never directed at me. More like about me. It wasn't the first time I'd picked up on that tone from them. Rachel's been the family favorite since we were kids. Lydia helped her get her first job, pulled strings to get her into a competitive internship, and even paid for part of her study abroad trip. Meanwhile, I was the artsy one who needed to get a real job. Every accomplishment I had growing up, winning design competitions, getting hired straight out of college, running my own freelance business, Rachel always found a way to make it seem less. And now, apparently Ethan was next on their list. At one point during dinner, Lydia brought up how she'd heard Ethan used to work at a pharmaceutical company and asked why he left. Ethan explained it was a layoff, downsizing during a merger, but Lydia gave this little hum and said, "That's what they all say." Rachel then leaned in with a smug look and asked if I knew about the girl from accounting Ethan used to talk to. I looked at her confused and she shrugged like she was doing me a favor. Ethan stayed calm the entire time, even when it was clear the questions were meant to corner him. After everyone left, he told me he felt like he'd just walked into an interview for a job he didn't apply for. I tried to brush it off, told him my family just had strong personalities and probably needed time. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about being cautious. It was targeted. Growing up, Rachel had a habit of bringing up embarrassing things at family gatherings, like the time I failed my driving test or when a guy I liked ghosted me. She always made it seem like she was just being funny. Now, it's Ethan she's circling, and I could see it clearly for the first time. Lydia made a big deal before leaving. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "Don't let romance blind you, sweetheart. The wrong man ruins everything." It wasn't advice. It was a warning, and not a subtle one. I asked my mom later if she thought Ethan gave off any red flags. She paused, then said Lydia was probably just being protective, that she had good intentions. But she didn't actually answer the question. And I noticed how she didn't stop Lydia at the dinner, didn't step in when Rachel got personal. It was the kind of silence that speaks volumes. Ethan's always been private about his past relationships, and I've respected that. But suddenly, with all their little comments hanging in the air, I started wondering if I'd missed something. Like maybe not knowing why he left his old apartment wasn't just a detail, it was a blind spot. Not because I thought he was lying, but because they were planting those doubts deliberately. That's when I decided to stop ignoring it. I didn't want to accuse anyone or start a fight, but I needed to start paying attention. Not just to Ethan and whatever stories they were trying to dig up, but to the pattern forming around me. Every comment, every interruption, every whisper. It wasn't random. It wasn't protective. It was coordinated. This wasn't the usual family tension I'd gotten used to over the years. This felt like a campaign, and I was going to figure out exactly why they wanted Ethan out of the picture, because the timing, the pressure, and the fake concern all felt too precise to be coincidence. A week after that dinner, I agreed to have lunch with Lydia. I thought maybe if I sat down with her one-on-one, things would calm down. We met at a quiet little cafe downtown that she picked. From the start, she acted like nothing had happened, complimented my hair, asked about wedding colors, and then halfway through, leaned in and said there was something concerning she'd come across. I asked her what it was, and she just smiled and said I'd understand when it's too late. No details. Just that cryptic line like she wanted to scare me but couldn't back it up. That night, Rachel texted me out of the blue. She wrote, "There's something you should probably know. Can't talk right now though." I replied immediately, asked what she meant, but she never answered. Not that night, not the next morning, but just silence. Ante, that kind of half message that leaves you hanging on purpose. Around the same time, I noticed Ethan got a call from a number he didn't recognize. We were sitting on the couch, watching something, and he stepped outside to answer it. When he came back in, he looked annoyed. I asked who it was, and he said just a spam call. He didn't explain further, and I didn't push it. The next morning, Rachel finally followed up. She sent me a screenshot of what looked like a text conversation. The image was blurry, cut off, and missing names or dates. But just a vague message that said something like, "I miss the old times. I still think about you." According to Rachel, this was from Ethan to someone named Bree. I stared at it, confused. It didn't even look like Ethan's texting style. The font was strange, the layout didn't match his phone's format, and the message looked cropped. I showed it to Ethan. He didn't yell or flip out. He just stared at it and asked if this was seriously what they were doing now. He said he had no idea who that was or where the message came from. He didn't accuse Rachel of faking it, but he said if someone had access to old group chats or screenshots, it would be easy to twist something harmless into something shady. That weekend, we went to brunch with some extended family, cousins, uncles, a few older relatives. Rachel was there too, acting overly sweet. Midway through the meal, she brought up Ethan's old apartment. She said something like, "Oh, wasn't that the place where the neighbors complained about the shouting? I remember hearing something." She said it casually, like it was a passing thought. Ethan didn't say anything, just focused on his food. I looked around and saw a few people glance up, but then quickly go back to their plates. A few days later, I ran into Ethan's ex at the grocery store. I'd never met her before, just heard she lived in the same neighborhood. She was polite and friendly, even congratulated me when she saw the ring. We chatted briefly in the produce aisle and I asked her, carefully, about the apartment. She said there were constant issues with rats and that Ethan had moved out after the building started getting loud at night from new tenants. No mention of arguments. No drama. I brought that up to Lydia the next day. She rolled her eyes and said the ex couldn't be trusted. Claimed she was probably still bitter and had always been the attention-seeking type. But nothing about our conversation made her sound like that. She didn't even mention any bad blood. At that point, I started connecting dots. I ordered a background check on Ethan, not because I thought something was wrong, but because I needed to end the noise. The report came back clean. No criminal record, no debt, no hidden accounts, no legal issues, not even a parking ticket. Rachel didn't stop though. A couple of days later, she told me she was starting to feel like Ethan's life was too perfect and that it made her nervous. She said it reminded her of people who were hiding something big, something dark. I asked her what she meant, but she just shrugged and said I should be careful. I didn't argue. I just took notes. I started writing everything down, what was said, when, and by whom. At this point, it didn't feel like concern anymore. It felt like strategy. They weren't pointing things out to protect me. They were building a case, one step at a time, trying to get ahead of the wedding. And each time I checked the facts, their story cracked, but that didn't stop them. They didn't care if the accusations held up. They just wanted to keep the smoke going, hoping I'd eventually believe there was a fire. And for the first time, I stopped wondering what they were trying to find wrong with Ethan, and started wondering why they needed him to be wrong so badly in the first place. A few days after the blurry screenshot incident, Rachel forwarded me a job posting. It was for a creative director role in a city 3 hours away. The message came with a casual note, saw this and thought of you, better fit than freelance stuff. I checked the job listing. It was in a city Ethan would never relocate to, far from both our current lives. I didn't reply, but I saved the link. I started saving everything. Later that week, I hosted a small dinner at our place. Just a few close friends, some coworkers, and by Ethan's suggestion, Rachel and Lydia. We figured keeping the peace might be better than fueling whatever narrative they were spinning behind the scenes. They showed up looking polished, smiles perfectly measured. Midway through dinner, Rachel brought up how her fiancé Derek had just made junior partner. Lydia chimed in about how proud the family was of him, then asked Ethan what his next move was after data analysis. The tone made it sound like his career was a temporary hobby. Rachel steered the conversation toward ambition and long-term vision. She went on about how Derek was already looking into buying property and hinted that people who didn't set timelines often drifted through life. It wasn't an open insult, but it hung in the air. They weren't criticizing directly, they were painting a picture for everyone else in the room. After dinner, one of my friends pulled me aside before heading out. She said she felt like the whole evening was staged. Not in a dramatic way, but in how Rachel and Lydia controlled the flow of conversation, made sure Ethan never had a chance to speak without comparison, and constantly looped it back to how some couples just don't plan enough. It was too coordinated to be random. Then came the worst part. While saying goodbye, Derek let it slip that he and Rachel had been curious about Ethan's job history and dug around a little. He laughed it off like it was normal, but the look on Ethan's face said everything. They'd gone through his background, not by asking, by snooping. We didn't confront them that night. Instead, I added it to the growing pile. The resume digging, the job offer out of town, the just curious comments. It was becoming a pattern, not a coincidence. A week later, Lydia sent an invitation to a charity gala she was organizing. She emphasized how important it was for family to show up for family and name-dropped a few big donors who would be attending. I didn't want to go, but Ethan said we should make our presence known. So we went. A cut. The event was upscale, glass walls, overpriced finger food, a string quartet playing in the background. While I was walking back from the restroom, I passed behind a floral partition and overheard Lydia talking to someone. Her voice was low but clear. Some women are about to learn the hard way who they're marrying, she said. She laughed after like it was a joke, but the tone wasn't funny. Later during her speech, Rachel took the mic to introduce Derek. She called him someone who never hides anything, and turned her head directly toward Ethan when she said it. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. Ethan leaned in minutes later and told me that was the last time he was attending anything involving my extended family. He didn't ask, he told me. And I didn't argue. The next morning, I started looking deeper. I started with Lydia's charity, public records, reviews, mentions on event sites, a few blogs. It wasn't hidden, but it wasn't obvious either. There were multiple complaints about disorganized events, missing refunds, and a few pointed comments accusing the charity of unclear budgeting. I checked Rachel next. While digging through old mentions in social circles, I came across a woman who used to date Derek. I reached out. She answered. We met at a cafe near her work. She wasn't bitter or dramatic. She was calm, dressed like someone who had moved on, but still remembered enough to matter. She said Derek cheated on her, and Rachel knew the whole time. They weren't even fully broken up when Rachel started going out with him. That part wasn't even the bombshell. She told me Rachel offered her money to stay quiet, not in some hush-hush cash under the table kind of way, but a paid retreat she suddenly offered her right before Derek's promotion interview. The woman turned it down. She didn't go public either. She just walked away, but she was willing to speak on record now, if it ever came to that. I thanked her, kept every message, every screenshot, and backed up every file. By the end of that week, it was all clear. This wasn't concern. This wasn't protective. It wasn't even personal jealousy. It was calculated, targeted, strategic. Rachel and Lydia weren't trying to help. They were trying to destroy, quietly, socially, without fingerprints. They wanted Ethan gone, and if they had to ruin a few reputations or bend the truth along the way, they were fine with that. But now they weren't the only ones keeping receipts. 2 weeks after the charity gala, I got an anonymous email at work. No subject line, no name, just attachments. I almost deleted it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside were screenshots of Lydia's charity financial records, real ones, not rumors. Several entries showed large payments to a local construction company over a span of 5 months. Those months had no recorded events, no public galas, no community outreach. But the invoices listed things like stone patio install, custom water feature, and interior redesign. I cross-checked the contractor's name and found a business page with reviews. A few photos matched the exact setup Lydia had posted in her backyard last year. She called it her outdoor escape. Apparently, it had been paid for with donor funds. The same day, I reached out to a mutual contact who used to work in HR at the firm Rachel got hired at. I asked, casually, if Lydia had ever reached out during the hiring process. The contact didn't even hesitate. Lydia had personally called and emailed multiple times, pushing Rachel's resume, even offering partnerships between the charity and the company if they gave her a shot. I forwarded the charity documents to Mason, a friend of mine who works in corporate auditing. He looked them over and told me they weren't just suspicious, they were serious. If those payments were made using nonprofit funds and had no documented approval, Lydia could be looking at financial misconduct charges. That same evening, an old college friend messaged me after seeing one of my posts about wedding stress. She casually dropped that Rachel had once been engaged before Derek. I had no idea. According to her, Rachel left the guy 3 days before the wedding, no explanation. The guy had already paid for most of the expenses. She disappeared and didn't even return the dress. I started checking more records. Property records, business licenses, nonprofit filings. Lydia had listed multiple homes under LLCS. One of them had 2 open liens against it from unpaid contractors. Another had been rented out while claiming to be part of a community outreach project. Nothing matched what she presented to the public. 3 days after I got the email, Lydia's charity suddenly canceled their upcoming fall fundraiser. The message on the website said it was due to internal restructuring and compliance auditing. The timing wasn't a coincidence. That weekend, Rachel sent a gift through a mutual friend with a note checking in, trying to test the waters. She acted casual, complimented the furniture, and then dropped in a few awkward comments about Ethan's work and whether his company had enough long-term growth. She walked around the space like she was checking for dust. I didn't offer coffee. I didn't offer anything. After she left, I started building a timeline. Every time they made a move against Ethan, something else in their lives was under pressure. The fake text message came the same week Derek's firm did their promotion evaluations. The resume digging happened right after negative reviews of Lydia's last event surfaced. It was all connected. Ethan cut off all contact with them completely. No more family events, no responses to invites. He told me I could do what I wanted, but he was out. I didn't argue. I started declining things too. At lunch one afternoon, I met up with my dad. He never got involved in the drama, always stayed quiet. But this time, he told me Lydia had always been the one behind the scenes, steering the family, vacations, decisions, even finances. He said she'd discouraged independence more than once, usually through help that came with strings attached. Then came the family barbecue. Everyone was relaxed, no formal setting, no speeches. But Rachel made a comment loud enough for several people to hear. Something about how people with side accounts can be tricky during marriage planning. I turned to her and asked what side account she was referring to. She froze, smiled, changed the subject. I noticed some of the relatives didn't laugh this time. A few drifted away. No one followed her around like they usually did. Lydia's voice wasn't the loudest in the yard anymore. I took everything, screenshots, emails, timestamps, overheard conversations, and put it into a digital folder. One for Lydia, one for Rachel. Everything organized, everything backed up. I wasn't going to explode or storm out or make a scene. I wasn't going to send dramatic messages or yell at a barbecue. I was going to let their words and their actions do all the talking when it was time, and only to the people who needed to see the truth. My parents suggested hosting an engagement party, something low-key at a local venue with family and friends. I agreed, not because I believed it would go smoothly, but because I wanted Rachel and Lydia to try again. I knew they wouldn't be able to help themselves. And this time, I wasn't walking in blind. Lydia insisted on covering some of the costs so she could frame it as a rescue rather than a gift. She paid for the flower arrangements and appetizers, then made a point of telling guests she had to rescue the budget because the couple didn't really plan the numbers right. She laughed it off like a joke, but it was clear she meant every word. Multiple people heard it. Rachel brought a +1, not Derek, but a friend from her work. During a conversation near the drinks table, the friend randomly brought up prenups and how some marriages crash because of secrets people think won't come out. Ethan was standing right there. She glanced at him while talking. No one called her out, but the message landed. Later, during toasts, Rachel took the mic. She started with a few compliments, then dropped a line about how real relationships are built on honesty, not appearances. She looked straight at Ethan as she said it. Some people laughed nervously. A few looked uncomfortable. I didn't respond. I just watched. I noted who smirked, who stayed silent, who avoided eye contact. The next day, I called my cousin Jordan. He was there. He told me Rachel and Lydia had rehearsed what they were going to say the day before the party. They even joked about how they'd watch Ethan squirm. Jordan didn't think it would go that far, but he confirmed everything. That was the last straw. I sent Rachel a message. No insults, no threats. I told her I knew exactly what she was doing, and I reminded her that people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. I mentioned Derek's old behavior, how she cleaned it up, and how quickly it could all resurface. I didn't ask her to stop. I told her she already went too far. A mutual friend mentioned that Derek had confronted Rachel after the party, without any direct involvement from me. The fight got loud, happened in a parking lot, and people saw it. Word spread fast. A few days later, I heard Rachel's name was getting left out of event guest lists. Some of her coworkers stopped interacting with her outside of meetings. Meanwhile, Lydia tried another move. She contacted someone who used to work with Ethan years ago, an old colleague from his first job, tried to check in and dropped hints about Ethan having things to hide. That call made it back to Ethan's boss. HR was notified. The interference was flagged and labeled inappropriate. Lydia's name was officially logged. That night, Ethan told me that after the wedding, he would be done with everyone involved in this. No exceptions. I told him he wouldn't have to wait long. I was already making sure they couldn't touch us again. A week later, I received another anonymous message. This time, it came from someone claiming to be Lydia's former assistant. Attached were spreadsheets and expense reports, entries labeled wellness retreat and mental health recovery. But the destinations were luxury spas. The amounts were in the thousands. Not long after that, the man Rachel had once left at the altar reached out. He'd heard from someone that I was having issues with her. He sent me archived emails, ones where Rachel joked about my career, called me easy to influence, and admitted she was trying to test Ethan's loyalty by planting doubts. I organized everything. Each message, each file, every receipt. I had the documents anonymously delivered to the treasurer of Lydia's charity through a trusted third party. We met at a small cafe. I didn't accuse anyone. I just passed the documents across the table and asked that they take a look. I didn't ask for anything else. No credit. No attention. I left the folder with them, stood up, and walked out. The fallout didn't take long. Within a week of handing over the documents, Lydia was summoned by the board of her nonprofit. The treasurer had verified several of the flagged expenses and immediately called for an emergency review. Lydia wasn't informed until the morning of the meeting. By then, her login credentials had already been revoked, and her upcoming charity appearances quietly removed from the website. The board brought in an external audit firm to examine the last 2 years of the nonprofit's financial records. While that was underway, one of Lydia's former event planners contacted the board directly. She submitted a sworn statement confirming donor funds were frequently used for Lydia's personal expenses, vacation airfare, home upgrades, and even a private birthday dinner at a 5-star resort disguised as a team-building retreat. Around the same time, Rachel's own reputation took a nosedive. 2 former interns at her firm submitted formal complaints, each describing a pattern of manipulative behavior, public humiliation, and favoritism. I didn't reach out to them. I didn't even know them. But their complaints matched things I'd experienced firsthand, and it was enough to trigger an internal investigation at her office. Lydia's suspension became public shortly after. Her name disappeared from 3 upcoming fundraising events, and 2 corporate sponsors pulled out quietly. One of them issued a statement about awaiting clarity on internal accountability. The nonprofit's site removed her bio page without any announcement. Rachel's situation kept getting worse. A major client called her firm to request reassignment after expressing discomfort with conduct during meetings. Her team lead flagged the account and began a review of her email correspondence. Word began to spread within their circle, quietly but consistently. The family started to fracture. A few relatives stayed silent, not wanting to take sides, but others started skipping calls, distancing themselves, and removing Rachel and Lydia from group chats and weekend plans. The loyalty wasn't universal anymore. People were reading between the lines, and some had seen enough to decide for themselves. Ethan and I finalized our wedding list. We cut it down. No big spectacle. No distant cousins or social obligations. Lydia and Rachel weren't invited. We didn't send formal no's. We just didn't include them. No explanation needed. The silence was the answer. Not long after, one of my cousins mentioned in passing that Derek had moved out of Rachel's place. He stopped showing up to work events with her. He wasn't responding to her messages. No breakup announcement, just absence. Then Rachel was dropped from her best friend's bridal party. Lydia was removed from a speaker panel she had been scheduled for at a regional fundraising conference. One by one, doors were closing, and no one was forcing them shut. They were closing on their own. The nonprofit board eventually issued a formal press release. They confirmed they were seeking legal advice regarding financial mismanagement and donor deception. The language was careful, but the meaning was clear. Lydia wasn't just removed. She was being investigated. Back at Ethan's company, something else shifted. His manager called him in for a private chat. They knew about Lydia's attempt to reach out. They had already flagged it as external interference. The manager apologized personally and told Ethan they were fast-tracking him for a leadership role. It had nothing to do with pity. It was a recognition of how he handled pressure without retaliating or spiraling. Lydia tried to spin the story, claimed I was holding a grudge, that I let a man change me, or that I was cutting off family over nothing. But several family members had already seen the documents. They weren't relying on rumors anymore. One of Rachel's younger co-workers contacted me privately. She told me she always suspected Rachel was different behind closed doors. She'd heard her gossip, plant rumors, and twist facts. She ended the message with, "You weren't the only one she tried to sabotage." Now, with the dust finally settling, Ethan and I started finishing wedding plans. No drama, no tension, just the people we wanted. The worst part was over, not because we shouted the loudest, but because we stayed steady while the lies collapsed under their own weight. The results from the audit came in 1 week before the wedding. Lydia was officially found to have redirected over $70,000 in donor funds toward private renovations, luxury spa treatments, and personal travel. The board's vote to remove her from all leadership roles was unanimous. A board contact quietly confirmed the documents had been received and were under review. No praise, no spectacle, just confirmation that the right people saw what they needed to. The charity's legal team moved ahead with a civil case to recover the money. Lydia's name began disappearing from websites, event rosters, and speaker lineups. A few former allies in the nonprofit world issued polite public statements, distancing themselves from ongoing legal matters. Her fall wasn't explosive, it was clinical. Rachel's firm placed her on unpaid leave. An internal ethics investigation was launched after several anonymous tips came in, each backed by emails and chat logs. The office atmosphere shifted. Her team was reassigned. Her name stopped appearing on major projects. Ethan's career, on the other hand, moved in the opposite direction. His company announced a new lead project, something high stakes and highly visible. During a team-wide meeting, his promotion was made official. His manager called it earned under pressure. A few coworkers clapped longer than necessary. He didn't look for the spotlight, but it found him anyway. Derek quietly packed up and left Rachel's apartment. No arguments, no explanations. A cousin mentioned it during brunch like it was common knowledge. Rachel didn't show up to the next family dinner. No one asked why. Ethan and I finished our wedding rehearsal at a small garden estate. Just our closest friends, Ethan's parents, and a handful of cousins. No one mentioned Lydia or Rachel. The air felt different, lighter, quieter. No one waited for drama. No one stirred it up. My mom approached me the evening before the ceremony. She didn't offer excuses. Just a simple admission, she let Lydia control too much for too long. She said she regretted it. I nodded, said thank you, and walked back to the table. No emotional scene, just acknowledgement. That was enough. Jordan and two cousins handled the floral setup and seating charts. They were efficient and focused. No distractions. No gossip, just support. One day before the ceremony, a mutual acquaintance mentioned that Lydia had asked about speaking with Caroline privately. I didn't respond. I didn't send a message. I didn't answer anything. The door had closed long before she knocked. The wedding took place on a cool afternoon. Every guest there had been chosen on purpose. There were no strange glances or whispered side comments. No tension. Just chairs in the grass, vows under open sky, and people who meant their place in our lives. During the reception, Ethan's parents gave a toast that felt honest. No rehearsed phrases. No subtle digs. Just joy for the future. For once, there wasn't a second agenda. Inside our ceremony booklet, beneath the schedule and the names, was one quiet line: truth doesn't demand attention, it outlasts noise. A few guests noticed. No one asked about it. When we left for our honeymoon, I shut down the folder on my desktop labeled evidence. Not because I was afraid, and not because I forgave, but because I would never need it again.